hours, their words, and have serious disabilities or mental health issues, which is not the place for them. Most of your agents are great people. I love them. I love them for what they do. I'm not criticizing most. But these new standards, don't you think this is a hindrance and reduces the morale of the vast majority of good people that you have in the FBI? And I ask you for a quick answer because I have a few other things.
So I respect our retired agents, that many of them come to our graduations now. I can tell you emphatically that they are those who think that we have lowered our standards, whether it's on physical fitness or anything else, are mistaken.
And you can prove that.
The facts back me up on that.
The standards are the same today as they were a decade ago. They've changed in some ways that are appropriate.
In fact, the physical fitness standards, depends on how far back you go, but the physical fitness standards that our current graduates have to graduate from Quantico actually exceed some of the physical fitness standards that were in place if you go back far enough with some of our retirees. But what I would tell you, I think part of the reason there's confusion, and again, I accept that these folks are raising their concerns in good faith, but we have actually access to the facts. And part of the reason I think there's confusion, just take the physical fitness thing as an example, is that before you had to pass the physical fitness test before you showed up to Quantico. Now you have to pass it in order to get a badge at Quantico. The standard hasn't changed. You still have to pass the same test, the same 12-point standard, et cetera. All that stuff applies. The only difference is you can pass it while you're at Quantico. But if you don't pass that same test that's been in place for a long time now, you don't get a badge. And we will dismiss people from Quantico, and we do, who don't pass that
Director, I know
test.
I have to wrap this up, and I appreciate that. If you could get us information that substantiates what you say, that should be easy enough to do to the whole committee, I'd appreciate it. You know, feelings in this administration are more important than functionality. It's resulted in a border crisis. We don't have time to talk about that. You've spoken out about it. I appreciate that you've spoken out about it. I think it's also resulted in shortages in our nation's law enforcement and our military, and I think it makes us less safe. So I look forward to seeing those statistics and that proof, because I have people talking in my ear that tell me otherwise, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Ray, I appreciate you being here today, and I certainly appreciate your forthcomingness and giving us information that I think that the American people want. And, you know, to me, you have a very difficult job right now. In the past, and under Comey, certainly, the Russian collusion narrative got out pretty heavily, and that came out of the FBI with the FISA warrants and that sort of stuff, spying on General Flynn. And then the laptop issue, the Hunter Biden laptop issue, which the FBI actually had in their possession. So I have 800,000 people thereabouts that I represent, and our job is to restore trust. And so in a lot of the hearings we've had this week, they said, well, the FBI is investigating that. Every answer was the FBI is investigating this. And so in some ways it kind of landed in your lap, and I appreciate you being here. But, you know, it's just, for me, the question of how does a 20-year-old acting alone get a long gun, a rangefinder? We know he bought a ladder. I guess he reconned here and realized he didn't need the ladder to get on top of the building, so he left it at the house. Get on a roof within 150 yards of one of the most famous people in the world, I guess now, and a former president. How does that happen? And how do we restore trust in the American people that the FBI and the DHS, who is under Mayorkas's directorate now, how do we verify and get trust back to the American people that these agencies are really working to protect the president? And I'm not trying to place blame specifically, but I never thought that we'd raid his house. I never dreamed that they'd raid a former president's house. I certainly never imagined that they would actually indict him. And I felt, well, they'll never find him guilty. And now we've had a threat on his life. So how do we restore trust in the government of this country and the agencies that are here that we pay and provide $3 billion a year to the Secret Service to protect some of the leading political candidates in America? That's a lot. I'm sorry. That's a lot of questions, but I'm going to give you a little room to talk.
Right. No, listen, obviously you included a lot, as you said, in your question. And as you might imagine, I disagree fairly strongly with a number of parts of it. But sensitive to the time, I guess what I would say this, I can speak to my approach to running the FBI. Again, the FBI was not involved in the physical security of the rally. That's, we come in as the investigators afterwards. And as I've said before, our investigation is an investigation of the shooter and his attack. there are separate investigations, the Inspector General of DHS and this outside independent panel that's been announced that would be looking at the Secret Service's performance. And those, I think, will be important to trust and confidence, if you will, in Secret Service. But from the FBI perspective, we can't promise that everybody's going to like the results of what we do, right? What we can promise is that we're going to do our best to do the work in the right way. That's all we can do. And so I keep telling our folks every day on this and on everything else, our focus has to be, we got to do the work in the right way. We got to make sure we do the work in the right way, and then no matter who likes it, because everything we do, somebody doesn't like it.
It's a credibility issue at this point. Do the American people trust what the FBI and the DOJ is going to tell them? And, you know, that's the thing with this. When I was early on, and I've only been here about 3.5, 4 years now, but the American people was the fear of the weaponization of government. So now we have this issue. Tucker Carlson asked the president, he said, are you afraid they'll kill you? And I remember that interview, and I thought, wow, I can't believe he went there. But here we are. And so as we work through this process, I think it's so important, and I think the chairman hit on this, is the audio of the shooter. You've interviewed the sniper, the Secret Service sniper that took out the target. Was he waiting on a green light? What was going on, and why did Mr. Crooks have a chance to get off 8 rounds? And we knew he was on the rooftop. I don't know for how long, but we know he was a marked target. So was he trying to get the green light, and was somebody not giving it to him?
So again, the performance, the adequacy of the performance of Secret Service will be the subject of the Inspector General investigation and this outside independent panel. What I can tell you, and I'm glad you asked the question, because this goes to something that that was part of an earlier exchange. The first time that anybody from law enforcement saw the subject on the roof was a few minutes before the shooting. Not with a gun. They didn't, at that point,
Right,
they didn't,
right.
but local law enforcement, a few minutes before, saw him on the roof and started radioing.
Did he have a
it.
backpack going up the roof?
Well, we haven't found anybody yet who saw him
Okay.
climbing up the roof. The reason why I've talked about how we think he got on the roof is that's based on forensic, our evidence response team and forensic analysis, that we're, without getting into all the details, footprints and things like that, that we can, fingerprints, et cetera, that we can see how he got on. But we don't have an eyewitness at the moment who saw him climbing up. So a few minutes before the shooting, local law enforcement saw him on the roof. Again, no weapon identified at that point. A few seconds before the shooting is when the law enforcement officer that I've talked about already is the one who was assisted by another officer who saw up on the roof, saw the shooter in a prone shooting position with the gun, turns.
How long did that happen before?
That sighting, that is the first time, to my knowledge, the first time anybody from law enforcement saw him with a weapon, that is seconds before he shot at President Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
So did the counter sniper not see the bad guy, the shooter, until after he fired a shot?
So after the subject fired a shot.
Until after the shooter?
I don't know the answer to that. It's possible we've already determined that, but as I sit here right now, I don't have that. But I can, yeah.
I think that's the logical next question with where the gentleman from Alabama's question was going. The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Director Wray, to the best of your understanding, how close did the assassin's bullet come to killing President Trump?
My understanding is that either it or some shrapnel is what grazed his ear. So I don't know that I have the actual
very
distance.
close, though.
What's that?
Very, very close, you would agree.
Yes.
Is this the biggest security failure that you've seen in your career?
Ooh. Well, certainly I think former Director Cheadle has already, I think, acknowledged that this was a significant, at the very least, a significant operational failure. I forgot her exact words, but I will defer on that. I think
Well, we really
it speaks
haven't
for
seen
itself.
anything like this in at least decades in this country, right?
The attempted assassination of a president, current or former, is a historic event.
Was this a sophisticated plot that Thomas Crooks carried out?
Well, I think probably depends on your definition of sophisticated, right? So on the one hand, he's a 20-year-old, seems to, from what we've seen so far, loner, without a lot of elaborate criminal history, without any criminal history or anything like that. On the other hand, he did clearly do some level of planning and recon.
When did the planning start, to the best of your knowledge?
What's that?
When did the planning start?
Well, we're still drilling into that, but we know, we assess that on July 6th,
So a week in advance.
for example, it seems to be that he seems to become very focused on it, because that's when, as I've testified here today, that's when the laptop that we've tied to him has the Google search, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy?
I mean, that seems like an indication of a total amateur, right? Someone who's searching for that, and he's doing it a week in advance.
Again, I don't want to characterize him, I frankly don't want to give him the credit of characterizing him as amateur or professional, but what I will say is that there are some things he did that involve a certain amount of planning and preparation. On the other hand, if you're telling me, do I think this is the most sophisticated ever? Of course not. We deal with much more sophisticated adversaries all the time.
And you probably prepare for more sophisticated plans to target high-level officials.
I'm sorry, I couldn't
You
hear
probably
you.
probably prepare for more sophisticated plans to target high-level officials, correct?
We don't do physical security, but yes, obviously we're investigating much more sophisticated attacks all the time.
How about the encrypted applications on his phone? Were those there for a while, or did he download them, in the days or weeks leading up to the assassination attempt?
I don't have the answer to that sitting here right now. I think it may vary from platform to platform because he had a number of encrypted messaging apps on it. And again, as I've said, we're trying to get access to that content. And that's important. I think it's important for everybody on this committee to understand that this is a real problem for law enforcement. That these companies, let's be clear here, these companies are designing their platforms in a way to, no matter how heinous the crime, no matter how rock solid the legal process,
I'm run out of
to
time,
get
so I
access.
want to get to the next question. At this moment, are you confident that high-level protectees, presidents, former presidents, are well protected?
Well, it's not really for me to say. I have a lot of respect for the men and women of the Secret Service who provide protection, just as I do for their counterparts at other agencies.
You can't say one way or the other. Your assessment as director of the FBI whether the president is safe?
I'm not an expert on protective details and physical security. What I would tell you is that we have a very robust system for sharing threat information with those agencies, and that in my experience, the men and women of the Secret Service are professionals who are hardworking, who are literally willing to take a bullet for their protectee.
You mentioned a thwarted assassination attempt against former President Bush. Are there any other thwarted assassination attempts against current or former presidents that you could discuss?
Not that immediately come to mind, but I'd have to go back and think about that. I mean, obviously we've been around for a while, and current and former presidents are high-profile targets who are attractive to all kinds of bad guys.
There's also been reports that the shooter's parents called local law enforcement to say he was missing on the day of the shooting. Is that correct? And if so, is that something that you would see as a sort of a natural thing for them to do? It seems like a 20-year-old who's been missing for a few hours, maybe his parents don't, first thing they do, call the police. What was going on with that situation?
So my recollection, I don't have this in front of me, my recollection is they did call, concerned that he was missing. My recollection, though, is that they didn't call until, I think this was after the event.
I see.
But I'm not certain of that, so I want to, hedge on that slightly because I have to get back to you to confirm that. I believe that part of the issue was that when he last saw his father, he, I think, indicated to his father that he was going to shoot at the range. And then, of course, he didn't go to the range and he didn't come back from that. And so I think that may have added to the level of concern.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Ray, I'm going to go a little bit different route with my questioning. In testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee in December of last year, you stated that the FBI is, quote, especially concerned about the possibility of Hamas supporters engaging in violence on the group's behalf, end quote, and that the threat from a, quote, terrorist organization who may exploit the attacks in Israel as a tool to mobilize their followers around the world, end quote. We've seen a lot of conduct today that I think is concerning to many people in terms of Hamas terrorists and their sympathizers. Reports have surfaced alleging that many of the groups intimidating and violating the civil rights of Jewish American students, like the Students for Justice for Palestine, received guidance and financial support from American Muslims for Palestine, and that AMP's directors allegedly have links to groups which fundraise for Hamas. Director Ray, is the Bureau aware of or investigating whether these groups violating the civil liberties of Jewish Americans are connected to or affiliated with Hamas or other terrorist organizations?
So we are investigating a lot of attacks and threats against the Jewish community. I've been very vocal on how big a concern that is, and certainly that was already heightened even before October 7th, and since October 7th, it went to a whole nother level. We are actively engaged with Jewish community, both locally and nationally. When it comes to foreign terrorist organizations and their role, or foreign adversaries and their role, we are looking hard to see if we can find linkage, for example, funding or things like that. Nothing that I can report at this time, but it's something.
But you're investigating it.
It's the kind of thing that we're looking for, absolutely, because we know that there's an interest in their part to foment.
We're watching it
yes.
in real time today.
Right, yes.
There are other reports that Mayor Bitar, National Security Council Coordinator for Intelligence and Defense Policy and Deputy Assistant to the President, was an active member in Students for Justice in Palestine at Georgetown University, which is one of the groups alleged to have ties to Hamas. Is the Bureau investigating whether the Biden-Harris administration is compromised by pro-Hamas groups and organizations?
Well, again, we're having quite a number of Hamas-related investigations.
I'm asking specifically about whether you are investigating whether the Biden-Harris administration has been compromised by pro-Hamas groups.
There's nothing along those lines that I can think of to report.
I also want to talk to you a bit about the FBI's investigation and involvement with the Russia collusion hoax. And the FBI was involved with that because of its potential relationship to election interference. Is that correct? The FBI's involvement in investigating the Russia collusion hoax. That was because there was concern about election interference. Is that correct?
The FBI was involved and staffed as investigators the Special Counsel Mueller investigation into efforts by the Russian government to influence and interfere.
With the election, correct?
Yes.
All right. So is the FBI investigating what just happened with Joe Biden being forced out of the race after winning the Democrat primary as election interference? Is the FBI investigating that right now?
I'm not aware of any investigation along those lines.
Director Ray, it was reported in March that the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force resumed communication with social media companies. And an FBI spokesman has stated that, quote, in coordination with the Department of Justice, the FBI recently implemented procedures to facilitate sharing information about foreign malign influence with social media companies in a way that reinforces that private companies are free to decide on their own whether and how to take action on the information, end quote. Director Ray, what specifically is the FBI doing to reinforce that such decisions are, in fact, for the private companies to make and not the administration?
So I think the best way to summarize it is that the guidance makes all kinds of additional steps to underscore that the FBI has no interest in participating in any way whatsoever in the company's decision-making, that companies are completely free to take any actions on their own, that we are simply passing information on to them for them to do whatever it is they want to do independently, consistent with, I should say, I very much appreciate the Supreme Court's finding that no evidence that the FBI coerced platforms to take content down.
Well, I don't believe that that's what the Supreme Court found. What the Supreme Court found was that the parties involved didn't have standing, but I think there's a whole body of evidence and legal analysis demonstrating that, in fact, this administration was violating the First Amendment rights of folks through social media companies. I'm just going to ask one final very quick question. If the FBI was involved in the removal or restriction of speech of Americans, do you agree that this would be a violation of the First Amendment?
Well, again, I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals. My understanding and my strong view from everything I've seen is that we did not violate the First Amendment.
Okay.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Director. I've just got two easy questions for you. In February, Donald Trump Jr. received a letter containing a white suspicious powder that read, quote, Lee Harvey Oswald's grandson must complete his contract, end quote. The United States Secret Service and the FBI said they would investigate the matter, and 5 months later, no more information has been released. I've also visited with Mr. Trump, and he has not received any information either. Why is that?
So as I sit here right now, I'm not familiar with civic investigation, but I do know that we have had, unfortunately, quite a few investigations of threatening mailings and white powder letters and things like that. So I'm happy to drill into it and have us circle back to see if there's more information we can share about it.
Thank you. And would you maybe circle back to the Mr. Trump, Donald Jr.? I think they'd like an update as well.
Sure. Let me, again, like I said, I'm not familiar with the specifics, but I'm happy to have us look into it and get back to whoever we need to get back to.
Thank you. Next question. The Pittsburgh field office now handling the assassination attempt investigation. Is that right?
Well, there's several. There at Pittsburgh field office is the lead office. We obviously have lots of, I think it's about over half of the FBI's field offices are working on this, including almost every headquarters division. So we have lots and lots and lots, several hundreds of employees working on it.
All right.
But yes.
Pittsburgh's the lead. Okay. This is the same office that botched the Hunter Biden laptop case. And they, in my view, and my constituents and many Americans, displayed a clear reluctance. That's a quote. Reluctance to really do any tasking, quote, effectively failing to investigate, according to the U.S. attorney on the case. My question is, how can we trust this office, and why does it keep reappearing in critical election-related investigations, or is that just dumb luck?
So I want to be a little bit careful on what I can say here, because some of what you're talking about relates to an ongoing investigation being led by the special counsel, Mr. Weiss. But what I can tell you is that the Pittsburgh field office's involvement in the matter you're talking about was the choice by the Attorney General Barr to have the U.S. Attorney and the FBI field office in Pittsburgh handle that particular matter. As to your summary or characterization of what U.S. Attorney, now former U.S. Attorney Brady actually said, I'd have to see the whole context. I'm not quite sure that's what he said, but I think as to your overall question about confidence, what I would tell you is that's the point I'm trying to make about the sheer breadth of our investigation. Yes, the Pittsburgh field office is the office on the ground. That's where the attempted assassination happened. But we are using the full might of the FBI, criminal and national security. That's why I'm pointing out that multiple field offices, over half of our field offices, almost every headquarters division, several hundreds of employees. These are people who are working around the clock to deal with this historic attack. And I have the utmost confidence in those hundreds of employees, agents, analysts, and professional staff, and the American people should too.
I yield to Mr. Jordan.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Director, I guess I'm not clear exactly where you said there were 8 shell casings on the roof, so 8 bullets were fired. We obviously know that Mr. Comparatori lost his life. Two other rally goers were injured, seriously injured, and then the one that hit President Trump. does that account for, were some of these individuals hit multiple times? Where did all 8 bullets go, is I guess my question.
I don't have that in front of me. I'm happy to circle back and get that to you, it's assuming we have that information yet. As I said, I think with respect to former President Trump, there's some question about whether or not it's a bullet or shrapnel that hit his ear. So it's conceivable. Although, as I sit here right now, I don't know whether that bullet, in addition to causing the grazing, could have also landed somewhere else. But I believe we've accounted for all of the shots in the cartridges. So let us get that.
And it's my understanding that the very first one was the one that hit the president. Is that the very first shot, or is that not accurate?
I don't, as I sit here right now, I don't know the answer to that. I believe we know the answer to that. I just don't have it in front of me.
Okay. Is there any chance I mean, it seems to me that this bad guy, this shooter, was focused on President Trump, but you indicated that he purchased 50 rounds of ammunition, I believe, earlier that day. Do you have any indications thus far in your investigation that in addition to going after and trying to assassinate the former president, he was also looking to do a lot more damage to other individuals?
That's a hard question to answer. What I would say is I agree with you that his preparatory activity is what we've seen so far, the limited information that has been relevant and interesting about his preparatory activity does seem to be that he had settled on former President Trump as a target and this rally as his moment to try to take a shot. In addition to the 50 rounds, of course, you have the issue of these explosive devices.
Right.
And so what else he may have had in mind is something that I think is very much of an open question. On the one hand, you have these explosive devices, including the one still back in his home that wasn't in quite the same stage as the one in the the ones in the vehicle. But he clearly had those explosive devices for some reason. And so we're trying to figure that out. As I've said before, sometimes in these kind of situations, you find like a manifesto or something like that. It's frustrating to us, and I'm sure frustrating to you and the American people, that we haven't found anything quite like that. We'd love to have a roadmap that tells us exactly what he was thinking. We haven't found that yet. Doesn't mean we won't. We're looking all over the place, and we're going to leave no stone unturned.
Thank you. A gentleman from Texas.